The morning at the Levington building always had its own rhythm, but today that rhythm was frantic. People in black suits hurried through the revolving doors as if each one carried the weight of the massive upcoming meeting on their backs. The ground floor parking lot was packed with luxury cars, neatly lined up under the cold light that had just hit the windshields. Maya Linsdale walked into the main lobby with her assistant. The 32-year-old woman was not tall, but the way she walked commanded attention. Shoulders straight, chin slightly raised, her eyes sharp and determined. However, anyone observant would catch a fleeting shadow of exhaustion across her eyelids, a mark of weeks spent under siege from pressure. The media was relentlessly questioning, shareholders were doubtful, and CFO Ronald constantly repeated that the company was at the red line. The acquisition of partner Clarissette, according to him, had to be signed today. Otherwise, the company would fall behind the market. Maya had heard those words so many times that she wanted to run away from them. But today, she couldn't. The most critical quarterly shareholder meeting awaited her on the 42nd floor. Inside the elevator, Maya suddenly flipped through the documents she had reviewed all night. The figures didn't cool down despite her repeated reading. Something was wrong, but she hadn't found the root of it yet. And the question that puzzled her most, why was Ronald continuously urging for an early signing? What is he hiding? The question had been lurking in her mind for weeks. The meeting room was large, with a high ceiling and glass walls that allowed light to flood in like a natural spotlight. The shareholders were almost all seated, each looking either stressed or impatient. Laptops were open and stacks of documents were neatly placed before them, ready to pass judgment on something significant. Ronald stood at the head of the table, in front of a large screen displaying charts of cash flow filled with red colors. He spoke in a serious tone. "We are 2 quarters behind schedule. If we continue to hesitate, the market will steal our opportunity. I propose the CEO sign the deal today. Any further delay is suicide." A few shareholders immediately nodded. Some looked at Maya with impatience, others turned to Ronald for assurance. The rest remained silent due to a lack of counter-information, or because they didn't want to side with Maya if things went wrong. Maya sat at the head of the left side of the table, her hands lightly clasped. She looked down at the contract, but her mind wasn't entirely focused on it. There was something unusually tight about this deal, as if it was too well prepared, yet lacking the crucial data she needed. "What are your reservations, Maya?" Ronald asked, his voice sharp enough to pressure her to answer immediately in front of everyone. Before Maya could open her mouth, bang! The meeting room door burst open so hard that several people jumped, nearly dropping their pens. A man stood at the threshold, breathing heavily, as if he had just run through half the building. His driver's jacket still had road dust, his hair was slightly messy, and his eyes were a mix of surprise and concern. In his hand was a brown wallet. Excuse me, everyone," he spoke quickly, still trying to catch his breath. "Someone notified me that a wallet was dropped on this floor. I was asked to return it personally." The whole room fell silent for a second. Then the murmuring erupted. One person frowned. "Good heavens, who let him in here?" Another whispered, "What kind of building security is this?" Ronald slammed his hand lightly on the table, enough to draw attention. "We are having an important meeting. What are you doing here? Who called you?" The driver, Evan, bowed his head. His voice was sincere. "I just followed the request in the app. The sender said the wallet was dropped in the meeting room on the 42nd floor. I knocked, but I guess no one heard." Maya looked around, checking to see who the wallet belonged to. Everyone shook their heads. No one looked like they had lost anything. No one looked at the wallet with the eyes of its owner. Something suddenly clicked in Maya's mind. A strange feeling, similar to when she discovered an edited report, but no one took responsibility. "Could you open the wallet, please?" she said, her voice calm. Evan hesitated slightly, but opened the wallet anyway. Inside, there was no ID card, no driver's license, no family photos. Nothing like a normal person's wallet. There was only a thicker-than-usual stack of receipts, a few sheets of paper with coded notes, and a small black notebook. Evan opened the first page of the notebook. His eyes froze. Maya clearly saw it. "Is there anything unusual?" she asked. Evan looked up, slightly flustered, but still honest. "These codes, they look like the way financial people track internal budgets. I used to be a chief accountant, so I recognize it immediately." Ronald sprang up as if he had been electrocuted. "What are you talking about? It's irrelevant. That's just a meaningless notebook." Maya looked closely at the handwriting. The familiar strokes appeared clearly, like pieces of a puzzle she had seen in internal reports. Whose handwriting? The answer hovered right before her eyes. The room was silent. All eyes shifted from Evan to Maya, then to Ronald. Maya stood up and took a step towards the driver. "Show me the next page." Evan turned the page. A line of red text stood out. Quote, "Shift Q2 loss to Q3. Create pressure forcing CEO to sign. Accelerate the deal." The atmosphere in the meeting room instantly changed color. Ronald stepped back half a pace, his face pale. This proves nothing." But his voice trembled. The whole board looked at each other and at Maya. This was no longer about a wallet. This was the truth accidentally bursting out, catching everyone off guard. Maya took a deep breath. She turned to Evan. "Could you elaborate on these notes?" Evan nodded, though he wasn't sure if he should delve so deeply into the affairs of a company he had never set foot in. But Maya's eyes were not those of a threatening CEO. They were the eyes of someone who had just seen the first thread of a pulled curtain. The tension in the meeting room, already palpable, now thickened as if a storm was imminent. Evan stood amidst the corporation's most powerful figures, his hand still holding the brown wallet, still warm from his grip. He looked down at it for a second, regained his composure, then looked up. "I was once a chief accountant," Evan said, his voice quiet but firm. "Now I drive for a ride-share service to better manage time for my daughter." A long silence ensued. The eyes watching him changed from annoyance to curiosity, then to suspicion. A driver who used to be a chief accountant. This momentarily confused the room, but no one stopped him from continuing. Maya crossed her arms, her eyes seeming to tell him he had nothing to fear. Her composure was the only anchor in a room full of sharp, knife-like gazes. Evan took out the stack of receipts and placed them neatly on the table. Next was the small notebook. He opened each item slowly, as if afraid of damaging important evidence. "These receipts," he pointed to the first one, "relate to financial consulting payments. The dates here," he pointed to the bottom corner, "match the time the company reported misallocated spending." A shareholder frowned. "Misallocation repeated 6 consecutive times?" Evan nodded slightly. "That's rare unless someone is doing it deliberately." He moved to the black notebook. On the very first page was the red text that had caused a stir moments ago. Evan slowly flipped to the next page, allowing others to clearly see the slanted handwriting. "Shift loss to Q3. Create pressure on the CEO. Accelerate the acquisition process." The murmuring grew louder, like sparks igniting into a flame. A young shareholder exclaimed softly, "Isn't that Ronald's style of note-taking in meetings?" Ronald leaped up, his voice sharp. Nonsense! He's just making everything up to cause chaos. Evan did not respond to the attack. He simply uncapped a marker and circled a few entries in the notebook. The shifted loss figures here align with the reports that had unusual adjustments 3 months ago. He took out 3 more receipts, placing them side by side. The cash flow in these receipts matches the date Ronald first announced the financial instability status. Maya slightly tilted her head. She remembered those reports very clearly, remembering every figure Ronald presented with such confidence that no one dared to question him. She took a quiet breath. Her heart was beating slower than normal. Evan had hit on what she had suspected for months. The codes in the notebook, the right-leaning script, the distinct loops on a few letters, were exactly the handwriting she had seen in the private memos Ronald sent her whenever he rushed her to sign the contract. But somehow, seeing them written inside that mysterious notebook, she felt they appeared like clear signs of a crime. Ronald tried to salvage his last bit of control. "You can't suspect me just because of a few notes. This is a setup. The wallet could be a trap. This man—" "What are you worried about?" an older shareholder interrupted, his voice deep but calm. "If it's a trap, why does the content match real data?" Ronald opened his mouth, but no convincing phrase came out. Maya gently turned the ring on her finger, a habit when she focused. She spoke, her voice quieter but sharper than before. "Evan, could you analyze one sample for the board to understand better?" Evan blinked in surprise. He hadn't expected to be asked to analyze anything in the middle of a multi-million-dollar shareholder meeting, but he saw the trust in Maya's eyes. That helped him stand firm. He pulled the stack of receipts closer, selecting one. "This receipt," he said, pointing with the tip of his pen, "shows the company making a payment to a consulting party on the same day an internal report noted a sudden deficit." He opened the corresponding page in the black notebook. "Here," he pointed to the text, "it reads, 'Prepare to push figures, CFO approved.' If cross-referenced, this is a sign of circular money transfer. Money is moved out via consulting services, then returned via other accounts to create the impression that the company is short on funds." A shareholder sighed. "An old trick." Evan nodded. "Yes, but when combined with creating a false crisis, it puts pressure on the CEO to sign an acquisition deal to compensate for the perceived loss." The meeting room fell silent. No one dared to speak, for everyone understood exactly whose actions Evan was describing. Ronald slammed his hand on the table, his voice so loud it was almost a shout. "You are making this up to slander me! What does a driver know about high-level finance?" Evan was unfazed. He rotated the notebook for everyone to see the last page. "This is the auxiliary account used to receive the circular funds," Evan said, pointing to the number sequence. "I remember this code clearly because it appeared several times in the receipts. It matches an auxiliary account the CFO sent to my former company when I was still an accountant." Ronald's face went white. Only Maya saw his hands slightly tremble. A senior shareholder murmured softly, yet loud enough for everyone to hear, "My God." Maya looked at Evan. In her eyes, for the first time since the meeting began, the light of clarity appeared. It felt as if she was standing in a smoke-filled room and someone had suddenly opened a window, letting the light flood in. A light coming from the last person she expected. The man in the driver's jacket stood next to the table, calmly peeling back layer after layer of the concealment Ronald had attempted to build. A senior shareholder spoke up. "I propose we conduct a deeper audit of all the transactions Evan has pointed out." "I agree. Me too. We cannot ignore this." The voices of assent rose rapidly. Ronald looked around, like someone watching his chair collapse with every sound. And Maya, she simply gave a slight nod, as if she had been waiting for this moment for a long time. Evan stood still, his hands resting lightly on the edge of the table, not claiming to be a hero, nor wanting to overstep his role. But his appearance had completely changed the dynamic of the room. The atmosphere in the meeting room completely shifted after the board requested a deeper audit. All eyes were no longer on the colorful reports, but focused on Ronald, who had led the finance department for almost 9 years. He tried to maintain composure, but Maya clearly saw every muscle on his face straining like a taut wire about to snap. Ronald looked around the room, as if searching for an ally, but the shareholders' silence felt like cold walls pushing him into the shadows. An elderly board member adjusted his glasses and spoke slowly. "Ronald, before we decide on a temporary suspension, I want you to specifically explain the unusual transactions Evan pointed out, especially the 3 large sums from last month." His voice wasn't harsh, but it was enough to make Ronald uncomfortable. He cleared his throat, opening a document file on the table. "Those sums belong to the consulting costs group. This is normal. I've submitted reports." Another shareholder frowned. But why was the money transferred out and then returned from 3 different accounts? And why did it coincide with the time the company announced an unusual deficit? Ronald swallowed hard. That was just a temporary adjustment to balance the cash flow. You all know this happens. Evan stood still nearby, not intervening, but Maya noticed he was lightly gripping his pen, as if ready to clarify any detail if asked. A shareholder suddenly turned to Evan. "Could you explain this in the simplest language possible? What exactly did Ronald do?" Evan was slightly surprised by the question, but he quickly regained his composure. He took a step toward the projection screen, pointing to the receipts still on the table. "To describe it simply," Evan said, his voice steady and slow, "he created a fake money circulation loop. This means money leaves the company through some consulting expense, then returns through supplementary costs or seemingly legitimate transactions. From the outside, it gives the impression that the finances are severely unbalanced." Evan paused for a second and continued. "And when finances appear critical, people are easily pressured into hasty decisions. For example, signing an acquisition deal at an inflated price." His words dropped into the space like a cold needle. Many people in the room straightened up as if they had just grasped something they didn't want to understand. Ronald immediately jumped up. "Stop right there! What you're saying is completely untrue. What does a driver know about high-level corporate strategy?" Evan did not reply to the attack. He only looked at the screen, saying quietly but audibly, "I'm not talking about strategy. I'm talking about cash flow. And cash flow doesn't lie." The statement silenced the room. Maya looked at Evan, then at Ronald. In that moment, she saw clearly the difference between the 2 men. One struggling to cover up, the other simply stating the truth. A female shareholder, who rarely spoke, slowly began, "Ronald, what bothers me most is why the notes in that notebook match your style of notation in internal reports word for word." Ronald immediately refuted. "That's just a coincidence. Anyone can write like that." But his voice had lost its usual sharpness. Maya gently pushed Ronald's old report file forward. "May I speak the truth?" she asked. The whole room nodded. "Over the past 7 months, I have received numerous personal memos from Ronald. All of them bear the exact same codes as in this notebook. The way he writes the slanted letter Q, the way he circles important items, and the habit of using an ellipsis after the word urgent. Maya pointed to the text in the notebook. It is so similar that if he didn't write it, someone deliberately imitated him, and that is even more suspicious. Ronald was cornered at the edge of the cliff. He took a long breath, then changed his tone to a softer one. Maya, you have to understand, I only wanted the company to get through the crisis. These adjustments are not harmful. I did everything for the company. But Maya looked straight at him, without flinching. If you did it for the company, why didn't you tell me? Why did you hide it in a secret notebook and pressure me to sign a deal that I hadn't even fully reviewed? Ronald was silent. For the first time since the meeting began, he had nothing left to say. The look in his eyes towards Evan was distinctly hostile, as if everything was the fault of the driver standing there. But everyone knew the truth wasn't with Evan. A shareholder tapped lightly on the table. I propose a vote to temporarily suspend the position of CFO, Mr. Ronald Grant, pending the results of a comprehensive audit. Many hands immediately shot up. There was no opposing voice strong enough to prevent it. Ronald stood frozen, his face ashen. He looked at Maya as if he wanted to say something, but finally just turned away, collected his documents, and quietly left the meeting room. When the door closed behind him, the atmosphere in the room felt as though it had been opened up. There was no more underlying tension or growling. Instead, there was confusion, bewilderment, but also a sense of relief as the truth had just surfaced. The board began discussing the next steps: independent audit, cross-referencing all data, and postponing the deal until everything was clear. Maya sat back down, but her body still felt tense from the months of unease. She said nothing for a few seconds, only staring at the brown wallet still on the table like living proof of a truth she had almost missed. Evan stood silently next to her, not trying to intrude on the board's conversation. He looked at the wallet, then at Maya, his eyes seeming to apologize for disrupting such an important meeting. But Maya shook her head slightly. She clearly saw something that the whole room was slowly realizing. Amidst the smoky room of distorted figures, Evan was the only one who brought the light of truth, of integrity, of a person who had nothing to lose and thus no need to lie. When the board finished their discussion, a member turned to Maya. We should review all the information Evan provided, and perhaps have him assist with the initial steps. Maya nodded. Not because Evan needed the opportunity, but because this company needed someone who could see what the people sitting here had overlooked for too long. Maya's office was quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos that had just unfolded in the meeting room. The light from the window shone onto her desk, creating a soft glow, as if helping everything calm down after hours of high tension. When the door closed, Maya finally felt the fatigue run down her spine, but at the same time, a strange sense of relief. It was as if the curtain she had been trying to pull back for months had been lifted for her by someone else, someone she least expected. Evan stood near the door, looking uncomfortable, as this was his first time in such a luxurious and quiet space. He placed the wallet on Maya's desk, as if returning something that didn't belong to him. Maya gestured for him to sit. Evan waved his hand, hesitated for a second, then sat down on the edge of the chair, back straight, careful not to touch the backrest, as if afraid of damaging something.
"Are you all right?" Maya spoke first, her voice so gentle that she was surprised herself. After months of having to be tough, she was speaking to a stranger with such softness today. Evan nodded. "I'm fine. I apologize for disrupting your meeting like that." "No," Maya shook her head, crossing her arms. "If it weren't for you, I would have signed that contract, and tomorrow morning I might have been fired." Her tone was calm, yet carried a blunt truth that made Evan slightly lower his head, as if he couldn't bear the compliment. Maya looked at him for a few seconds, and then asked directly, not in the manner of a CEO interrogating, but like someone who wanted to understand the story of the person in front of her. "You mentioned you were a chief accountant. Why are you driving rideshare now?" Evan gently touched his knee as if to steady himself. I worked as an accountant for 7 years. Stable job, enough to live on. He paused slightly, his voice growing quieter. But my wife passed away when our daughter was 2. Cancer. It was discovered too late. I didn't have time to prepare anything. Maya placed her hand on the table, slightly tilting her head. She didn't interrupt, just listened. I worked many jobs, hauling goods, warehouse work, temporary sales, then rideshare driving. The work isn't fixed, but I can be home with my daughter more. That's more important than holding the chief accountant position. He smiled lightly, a tired but gentle smile. I don't have much, but at least my daughter has her dad. Maya recalled the early years when she joined the company, burying herself in work, trying to prove herself in an environment where people doubted her for her youth rather than her ability. But listening to Evan, she suddenly felt her journey was smaller than his. She had power, status, while he went against the conventional path of life to preserve the most important thing.
You live alone with her? Maya asked softly. Yes, my daughter is 6. She gets sick often. Some nights I'm on a trip and the school calls me to come back because she's crying for her dad. I cancel the ride and drive back immediately. I earn less, but... Evan paused, then stated firmly, I don't want her to feel the lack of anyone. Maya pressed her lips together. For the first time in many long months, she felt her heart soften completely. Outside the office, she had to be strong, decisive, and keep the company afloat. But in this room, facing the man who was giving a strained smile while talking about his life, she was no longer the CEO. She was just a person learning how to listen. My finances. Evan lightly touched his chest, a habit of someone who strictly managed expenses. Not much, but clean. I keep every record. I don't owe anyone. I don't let my daughter go without. I'm not rich, but I never deceive. He looked at Maya with clear eyes. Perhaps that's why. I'm sensitive to unusual cash flows. A simple, everyday anecdote, but enough to make Maya look at him differently. Not because he used to be a chief accountant. Not because he saved her from a major conspiracy, but because he maintained his decency even when life pushed him into dark turns. In Maya's world, many people were hundreds of times richer and more powerful than Evan, yet they lacked that very thing, integrity, that couldn't be bought with money or position. You know what? Maya said softly, as if afraid to break the silence. If it weren't for you, I would have been eliminated from the very company I dedicated my youth to building. Evan flinched slightly, opening his mouth to object. I happened to be there. I didn't do anything big. He bowed his head, too shy to look her straight in the eye. That gesture made her realize he wasn't the type to take credit, and that made her trust him even more. Maya leaned forward. Evan, I want to ask seriously, would you be willing to join the temporary audit team? Or at least assist with the initial steps? Evan's eyes widened slightly, as if he had proposed something beyond imagination. He smiled awkwardly. I'm not sure. I still have to pick up and drop off my little girl. I don't want to leave her alone for too long. Maya nodded immediately, without pushing. I understand. Family is more important than any job. If you can't stay all day, I can arrange a suitable schedule. Or you just need to come in for a few sessions. Evan contemplated, looking like someone trying to untie a knot in his chest. He didn't agree yet, but Maya knew he was considering not for himself, but for his young daughter. The meeting ended when everything had been said. They walked out of the room, side by side in the long hallway under the white lights. Neither said anything more, but the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was like the moment two people had just survived their own separate storms and met at the calmest intersection. Maya knew that in that moment, her life was turning in a new direction, and so was Evan's. They didn't choose to meet, but fate had forced both of them to stand together in one room that day. The morning after that fateful meeting, the Levington building felt completely different. There were no more hurried footsteps chasing after opaque decisions, nor the wary glances between departments. Instead, a cautious silence fell over every corner of the hallway, as if everyone understood the company had just crossed a dangerous line that sometimes they didn't even know they were so close to. The board of directors began an expanded investigation that same week. What they discovered only sent shivers down everyone's spines. Ronald had left many errors, with the clear goal of creating an image of financial crisis to manipulate Maya's decisions. The circular transfers, the shady notes, the strange expenses were exposed under the light of an independent audit, layer by layer, like an old coat being stripped away from the lies. Maya did not avoid it, nor did she assign blame. The day she stood before the company board to announce the Comprehensive Transparency Campaign, the fire in her eyes made everyone feel strongly. She didn't want to hide anything, even the smallest detail. We deserve to know the real numbers. We deserve to work in a company where trust doesn't have to be begged for. Maya's voice was clear, strong, but held no hint of hatred. The shareholders, for the first time in many months, looked at Maya with support instead of scrutiny. She was no longer the young woman who had to prove her mettle to people 2 decades older than her. She had passed the test the company had unintentionally placed on her shoulders, the test of trust. And she passed it thanks to someone no one expected. As for Evan, his subsequent presence in the company was quiet. He didn't step into the meeting room anymore, didn't present under the flashlights, and didn't appear in any article. Maya protected him fiercely. She knew he didn't seek attention. The only thing he feared was that the noise could disrupt the simple life of him and his daughter. But in the closed audit sessions, Evan sat at the end of the table, holding a pencil and a stack of white paper, cross-referencing every single item. He pointed out small discrepancies that even experienced auditors missed. He explained the cash flow in the simplest way possible, as if narrating it to someone who wanted to learn the trade from scratch.
Sometimes, just by looking at one small entry, you can uncover the whole story behind it, he said. The audit specialists nodded. Maya watched from the outside, and for the first time, she saw that sometimes what the company needed most came from someone who held no title. That afternoon, as Maya left the building after a long meeting, the air began to turn cold. She wrapped her scarf tighter, walking to the parking lot, when she spotted a sight that made her pause. Evan was leaning into the back seat of his old car, carefully fastening the seatbelt for the child's seat. He did it meticulously, as if protecting the most precious thing left in his life. His daughter, Ellie, was swinging her legs rhythmically, her round, dark eyes lighting up when she saw Maya. "Hello, Miss Maya." Ellie smiled, her gap-toothed grin innocently captivating. Maya laughed genuinely. She bent down to the little girl's eye level. "Hello, Ellie. Did you have fun at school today?" "Yes, I got a sun sticker because I read all my words correctly." Ellie proudly showed her chest, where a sparkling golden sticker lay. Evan stood beside her, watching his daughter, his smile gentle, but his eyes gleaming with a pride that Maya distinctly felt. For the first time in years, Maya felt she was talking not as a CEO, not as an executive, but as an adult speaking to a child, a moment she rarely experienced in her busy life. When Ellie was securely seated, Evan closed the car door gently. He turned back to Maya, offering a simple "thank you." "Thank you for letting me assist." "Not everyone has the courage to do the right thing," Maya replied, her voice low, but clear enough to everyone. Evan shook his head slightly. "If I don't speak up, later when I look at my daughter, I'd be afraid I wouldn't dare teach her to live with integrity." He said it in the most ordinary voice, yet it rolled a warm streak into Maya's heart.
She stood silently for a moment, looking deeply into his eyes. Eyes not of a hero seeking recognition, but of a father who just wanted to live truthfully, to set an example for his daughter. "Evan," Maya said, "if one day you want to return to the finance profession, the doors of my company are always open for you. But if you choose to continue driving, I will respect that just the same. You saved this company not because of your profession, but because of the man you are." Evan smiled, for the first time not avoiding her compliment. "I will think about it. But either way, thank you for believing in me." He opened his car door and started the engine. Ellie leaned out the window, waving enthusiastically. "Bye-bye, Miss Maya." Maya waved back, the smile still on her face even as the car drove away. When the small car's taillights disappeared around the bend, Maya stood for a moment in the cold evening wind. She understood that she had just witnessed something she had never seen so clearly throughout her career. Sometimes an ordinary person, a person with no name, no power, no position, is the one who saves an entire major corporation from collapse. Not through manipulation, not through power, but through the simplest form of honesty. Maya turned back towards the Levington building. The glass facade reflected the sunset, looking like a sign of a new era. An era where she believed everything would be different, more transparent, more fair, and more humane. She walked inside, carrying a certainty she didn't have before. This company would be rebuilt, little by little, and she would be the guide, not alone, but with faith in the people who seemed the smallest. The story concluded there. An ordinary man drove his daughter home, and a female CEO stood at the crossroads of a new future. Both changed each other in unexpected ways. And sometimes, just one right action at the right time is enough to rewrite the destiny of an entire company and the destiny of the person themselves.